The arrival. The Korath Dominion had never lost a war. Not in 300 cycles of expansion. Not against the Velic swarms. Not against the crystalline harvesters. Not even against the stubborn, fire-breathing Kelthans who fought to the last breath. Every species that stood before them eventually knelt, surrendered, or burned. The Korath believed this was the natural order of the galaxy. They were faster, smarter, and more disciplined than anyone else. Their ships moved like silver blades through the void, cutting through resistance with surgical efficiency. Their commanders were trained from birth to think in terms of victory, never defeat. And now, as High Lord Admiral Crintle stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Endless Sovereign, he felt that same unshakable confidence settle over him like a familiar cloak. Before him stretched the largest armada the Dominion had ever assembled. 200 warships. 50 strike carriers. 30 cruisers built specifically to crack planetary shields. The fleet glittered in the light of the distant star, a perfect formation that had taken weeks to organize. Every captain knew their role. Every gunner had practiced their firing sequences 1,000 times. The Korath did not believe in chaos. They believed in precision. And precision, Crintle thought, would be more than enough to crush the humans. Humanity was young. Barely 3 generations into interstellar travel. Their colonies were scattered across a handful of systems, their fleets were small, and their technology was crude compared to the elegant designs of the Dominion. Crintle had studied the intelligence reports carefully. The humans built their ships like fortresses, slow and heavy, covered in armor plating that seemed excessive and inefficient. They relied on kinetic weapons, simple railguns and missiles, while the Korath used plasma lances and energy shields that could adapt to nearly any attack. It was almost insulting, Crintle thought, that the Council had sent him to deal with such a primitive species. But orders were orders. The humans had refused to submit. They had destroyed a Korath trade convoy and declared their borders closed. And for that arrogance, they would be reminded of their place. Crintle turned to his second-in-command, a sharp-eyed officer named Velrith. Status of the forward scouts. Velrith glanced at his console. Deployed as ordered, my lord. 15 scout ships advancing toward the inner system. They should reach human sensor range within the hour. Good. Crintle folded his arms behind his back. Once they confirm the human fleet's position, we will strike. I want this finished quickly. No prolonged engagements. No unnecessary casualties. We break their defenses, occupy their core worlds, and move on. Velrith nodded. Understood, my lord. But then something happened that no one expected. One by one, the scout ships began to disappear. At first, it was subtle. A single ship dropped off the tactical grid. Then another. Then 3 more in rapid succession. Velrith frowned and leaned closer to his console, tapping commands with increasing urgency. My lord, we're losing contact with the scouts. Crintle's eyes narrowed. Mechanical failure? No, my lord. No distress signals. No debris. They're just gone. A cold prickle of unease ran down Crintle's spine, but he forced it away. The Korath did not feel fear. Fear was for lesser species. Send a carrier group forward. I want eyes on that sector immediately. The carrier group moved ahead, their sleek hulls cutting through the darkness. But before they could reach the position where the scouts had vanished, every sensor on the Endless Sovereign began screaming at once. Alarms blared across the bridge. Officers shouted over each other. And then, impossibly, something appeared at the edge of the system. It was massive. Larger than any Korath dreadnought. Larger than anything Crintle had ever seen outside of orbital stations. The ship tore out of hyperspace with a sound that shouldn't have existed in the vacuum, a deep, resonating thrum that rattled through the hulls of every nearby vessel. Its hull was dark gray, scarred and pitted from countless battles, covered in angular armor plating that looked more like a fortress than a starship. Enormous railgun batteries lined its spine. Missile pods hung like clusters of predatory eyes along its flanks. And across its bow, painted in bold white letters, was a single word: retribution. For a moment, the entire Korath fleet froze. Officers stared at their screens in disbelief. Crintel's breath caught in his chest. This was not what the intelligence reports had described. This was not crude. This was not primitive. This was something else entirely. And then the human ship fired. The railguns roared. Not with the clean, precise hum of plasma lances, but with raw, brutal force. Tungsten slugs the size of shuttles tore through the void at relativistic speeds, slamming into the forward carrier group with devastating efficiency. Shields flickered and collapsed. Armor plating shattered. One Korath cruiser split clean in half, its reactor detonating in a silent bloom of white fire. Another spun out of control, trailing atmosphere and debris. Within seconds, 6 ships were gone. Just gone. Crintel's voice came out as a whisper. What is that? No one answered. Because no one knew. The humans had sent a single ship. One. And it had just torn through an entire carrier group like they were made of paper. The Retribution adjusted its course, moving with a predatory grace that defied its massive size. Its engines burned a deep, angry red. Its weapon batteries locked onto new targets. And somewhere deep inside that scarred, terrifying hull, Captain Marcus Hale watched the Korath fleet begin to scatter, and he smiled. This was just the beginning. The Predator. Captain Marcus Hale stood on the bridge of the Retribution, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed on the tactical display before him. The holographic projection showed the Korath fleet in perfect detail. 200 warships. Carriers. Cruisers. Strike wings. All of them desperately trying to regroup after the first devastating salvo. Their formations were breaking apart. Their communications channels were flooded with panicked voices. And Marcus could hear every word. He did not smile anymore. There was no satisfaction in this. Only cold, burning purpose. His tactical officer, Lieutenant Amara Chen, called out from her station. Sir, enemy fleet is attempting to form a defensive sphere around their flagship. They're pulling back their forward elements. Let them, Marcus said quietly. They think distance will save them. Chen glanced at him, uncertain. Sir. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his gaze never leaving the display. They've never fought anyone who hunts. They've only fought prey that runs or stands still. They don't understand what we are yet. He tapped a command into his console. Helm, bring us about. Target their left flank. Full burn. The Retribution moved. Not gracefully. Not elegantly. It moved like a hammer swung by an angry god. Its massive thrusters roared to life, pushing the dreadnought forward with terrifying acceleration. The Korath ships scattered like startled fish, trying to adjust their formations, but they were too slow. Too cautious. They had spent centuries perfecting tactics designed for symmetrical warfare, where fleets met in open space and traded fire until one side broke. But the Retribution did not trade fire. It delivered it. The railguns fired again. This time, the targeting computer had learned. It calculated trajectories based on Korath evasion patterns. It predicted their movements before they made them. Tungsten rounds tore through engines, reactors, and command decks with surgical precision. 4 cruisers exploded in rapid succession. A 5th lost its entire starboard side and tumbled into the path of its own escort, triggering a chain reaction that claimed 3 more ships. High Lord Admiral Crintel watched in horror from the bridge of the Endless Sovereign. His fingers gripped the edge of his command console so tightly that his knuckles turned pale. All wings, concentrate fire on that ship. Everything we have. The Korath fleet obeyed. Plasma lances lit up the void, brilliant streams of superheated energy converging on the Retribution from a dozen angles. Missiles streaked toward it in clouds, their warheads primed to shatter shields and melt armor. For a moment, it looked like the human ship would be overwhelmed. But then its point defense systems activated. Hundreds of automated turrets swiveled and locked onto incoming threats. Rail-fed autocannons fired in perfectly timed bursts, shredding missiles before they could detonate. Laser arrays burned through plasma bolts, dispersing their energy into harmless radiation. And the few shots that made it through struck shields that rippled and adapted, absorbing the impact and redistributing the energy across the entire hull. The Korath had designed their weapons to break through static defenses. But the Retribution's shields were not static. They learned. They evolved. And with every failed attack, they grew stronger. Velrith stared at his console in disbelief. "My lord, our weapons are not penetrating their defenses. We've landed over 300 direct hits, and their shields are still holding." Crintel's voice cracked. "That's impossible. No ship can withstand that much fire." "Perhaps," Velrith said slowly, "no Korath ship can." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Because in that moment, Crintel understood something fundamental. The humans had not built the Retribution to fight like the Korath. They had built it to fight against species far more dangerous. They had built it to survive. To endure. To win. Marcus watched the Korath fleet begin to fracture. Their elite strike wings, the pride of the Dominion, broke formation and tried to flank the Retribution from above and below. It was a textbook maneuver. One that had worked against 100 different species. But Marcus had studied those battles. He knew what they would do before they did it. "Chen, deploy drones. Pattern Delta." "Aye, sir." Hatches along the Retribution's hull opened, and dozens of autonomous combat drones launched into the void. They were small, fast, and utterly relentless. Each one carried enough firepower to cripple a frigate, and they moved with the kind of coordinated precision that only AI could achieve. The Korath strike wings never stood a chance. The drones swarmed them like angry hornets, tearing through their sleek hulls with railgun fire and micromissiles. Within minutes, the entire strike force was reduced to debris. Crintel's hands trembled. He had commanded fleets for 30 cycles. He had broken empires. He had crushed rebellions. But he had never seen anything like this. The Retribution was not just a warship. It was a nightmare given form. It moved with brutal intelligence, anticipating every tactic, countering every strategy. And worse, it seemed to be enjoying it. Marcus's voice cut through the chaos on the bridge. "Open a channel. All Korath frequencies." Chen hesitated. "Sir." "Do it." The channel opened. And for the first time since the battle began, the Korath fleet heard the voice of the enemy. It was calm. Cold. And utterly devoid of mercy. "This is Captain Marcus Hale of the United Earth Forces Dreadnought Retribution. You came to our borders with an armada. You destroyed our colonies. You killed our people. You believed we were weak. You believed we would kneel." There was a pause. A terrible, suffocating pause. "You were wrong." Crintel's breath came in shallow gasps. He tried to speak, to issue orders, but no words came. Around him, his officers stared at their screens in mute terror. The Retribution adjusted its course again, angling toward the endless sovereign with predatory intent. Marcus continued. "Your fleet is broken. Your pride is shattered. And now, you will understand what it means to face humanity." His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than any shout. "You were warned. Now you will be hunted." The channel closed. And in the silence that followed, every Korath officer on every ship felt the same thing. Not anger. Not defiance. Pure, absolute terror. Because they finally understood. They were not fighting a fleet. They were being hunted by a single ship. And there was nowhere left to run. The message. The endless sovereign tried to run. It was not a dignified retreat. There were no coordinated maneuvers, no tactical withdrawals, no careful preservation of fleet assets. High Lord Admiral Crintle simply shouted the order to fall back, and every ship that could still move obeyed. The pride of the Korath Dominion, the largest armada ever assembled, scattered like leaves in a storm. Cruisers abandoned their formation. Carriers left their fighters behind. Escort ships collided with each other in their desperate scramble to escape. And through it all, the retribution followed. It did not chase. Chasing implied urgency, desperation. No, the human dreadnought simply followed, moving with the patient, inexorable confidence of a predator that knew its prey had nowhere left to go. Its railguns fired in steady, measured intervals. Each shot was calculated. Each target was chosen. A cruiser trying to reach hyperspace range. A carrier attempting to deploy its remaining fighters. A command ship broadcasting orders to regroup. One by one, they died. And the retribution never slowed. Marcus Hale watched the carnage unfold with no satisfaction, no triumph. Only the cold satisfaction of a job being done. His crew worked in disciplined silence around him, their movements precise and professional. They had all lost someone to the Korath. Chen's brother had been stationed on the colony at New Havana when the Dominion's first strike came. The helmsman's wife had died defending the orbital platforms above Terra Nova. Even Marcus himself carried scars, not on his body, but in his memory. He remembered the evacuation shuttles burning as they tried to flee. He remembered the children's faces pressed against the viewports, screaming silently into the void. He remembered promising himself that if he ever got the chance, he would make sure the Korath understood what they had done. Now he had that chance. "Sir," Chen said quietly, "the flagship is attempting to charge its hyperdrive." Marcus nodded. "EMP torpedoes. Full spread." 6 torpedoes launched from the Retribution's forward tubes, their drives burning bright blue as they streaked toward the endless sovereign. The Korath point defense tried to intercept them, but the torpedoes were shielded, armored, and designed specifically to survive exactly this kind of fire. 3 made it through. They detonated in a cascading wave of electromagnetic energy that swept across the flagship's hull like an invisible tsunami. Every system aboard the endless sovereign went dark. Engines. Shields. Weapons. Communications. Even the emergency lights flickered and died. The ship drifted, helpless and silent, a corpse floating among the wreckage of its fleet. Crintle stood alone on the darkened bridge, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Around him, his officers tried desperately to restart their consoles, but nothing responded. The backup generators were fried. The secondary systems were dead. They were completely, utterly vulnerable. And the retribution was still coming. Velritha's voice came from somewhere in the darkness, shaking and raw. "My lord, what do we do?" Crintle had no answer. For the first time in his life, he had no answer. The retribution came to a stop less than 5 kilometers away. Its massive hull blotted out the stars, casting the endless sovereign in shadow. For a long moment, nothing happened. The silence was worse than any weapon. And then, the human broadcast began. This time, it was not just audio. It was visual. Every functioning screen on every Korath ship still capable of receiving transmissions lit up with the same image. Captain Marcus Hale stood on the bridge of the Retribution, his uniform spotless, his expression carved from stone. Behind him, the crew worked with quiet efficiency, their faces hard and unyielding. And when Marcus spoke, his voice carried the weight of an entire species. "You came to our worlds uninvited. You attacked our colonies without warning. You killed civilians. Children. Families. You believed we were weak because we were young. You believed we would break because we were scattered. He paused, his eyes cold and unforgiving. You believed wrong. Crintle sank into his command chair, his body trembling. Around the system, on every Korath ship, officers and crew members watched in silent horror. Some wept. Others stared in numb disbelief. A few tried to shut off their screens, but the signal overrode their controls. The humans wanted them to see this. They needed them to see this. Marcus continued. This fleet, your greatest armada, was destroyed by a single ship. Not because we are invincible. Not because we are gods. But because we are human. And when you threaten what we love, when you harm what we protect, we do not surrender. We do not negotiate. We end the threat. His voice dropped to a deadly whisper. And you, High Lord Admiral Crintle, are now a message. The Retribution's forward batteries powered up, their targeting lasers painting the endless sovereign in brilliant red light. Crintle closed his eyes. He thought of his home world. His family. The empire he had served for so long. And he realized, with bitter clarity, that none of it mattered anymore. The Korath Dominion had made an enemy it could not defeat. But Marcus did not fire. Your flagship is dead, he said calmly. Your fleet is broken. Your survivors will be allowed to leave this system and return to your territory. When you arrive, you will tell your leaders what happened here. You will tell them that humanity gave you one warning, and you ignored it. You will tell them that if the Dominion ever crosses into human space again, we will not send a fleet. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes burning with cold fire. We will send 10 dreadnoughts. And we will not stop until your empire is ash. The broadcast ended. The screens went dark. And in the terrible silence that followed, the Retribution turned away from the endless sovereign and began moving back toward human space, its engines burning bright against the void. It left behind a graveyard. 73 Korath warships destroyed. Thousands dead. An empire's pride shattered. And a single, undeniable truth. Humanity was not prey. Humanity was the hunter. And the galaxy would never forget. Weeks later, when the surviving Korath ships limped back into Dominion space, they carried that message with them. The council listened in stunned silence as Crintle described what had happened. Some refused to believe it. Some demanded immediate retaliation. But the High Counselor, an ancient warrior who had seen the rise and fall of a dozen civilizations, simply shook his head. We have awoken something we do not understand, he said quietly. Something that does not fear us. Something that will not stop. He looked at Crintle with eyes full of sorrow. The humans are not like the others. They do not conquer for glory. They do not fight for territory. They fight because they must. Because they have already lost too much to ever surrender. The council debated for days. But in the end, they made the only choice they could. The borders with human space were declared forbidden. No Korath ship would cross them. No Korath fleet would approach them. And the story of the Retribution was told to every officer, every soldier, every citizen of the Dominion as a warning. Because the Korath had learned what every other species in the galaxy would eventually learn. Humanity could be kind. Humanity could be compassionate. Humanity could be generous and patient and forgiving. But if you threatened what they loved, if you harmed their people, if you made them your enemy, then you would see the other side of humanity. The side that built weapons like the Retribution. The side that fought not with elegance or precision, but with brutal, relentless determination. The side that would chase you across the stars, hunt you to the ends of the galaxy, and make absolutely certain you never, ever threaten them again. And for the first time in 300 cycles, the Korath Dominion knew what it meant to feel fear. Because they had seen the human warship. And they had frozen in absolute terror.